So HaveYouHeard recently conducted a research done within the township market in order to get a greater understanding in terms of what is driving conversational recommendations and what is actually driving brand relevance, brand loyalty within the township market. One of the biggest elements that we started to see is that there's a need to be liked and a need to be right within the township environment. So when we actually start to recommend them, they need to provide value to the overall consumer, which then essentially provides me with status, but also provides me with an affinity to the people that I'm recommending it to, because it has added value to their lives, and that value exchange has essentially come from me. One of the other powerful elements that came through was understanding that women specifically within the township market say around 21,000 words per day, with around 7,000 of those being directly related to a brand, which is interesting because when you start to look at that, 83% of those conversations came from experiences with brands within their environment, as opposed to it's only 17% coming from actual advertising that was seen within the township market. What becomes more interesting when you start to see that 17% of conversations are driven by advertising is when you start to understand how they want to be spoken to. So one of the big elements that came through that we started to realize is that consumers want to be spoken to predominantly in English, and that the reason being is because English is seen as a higher education language. Specifically within South Africa, when you start to look at the top schools, at the top universities, they're predominantly driven through English conversation. However, understanding that, you also need to give them a perspective or give them an understanding that you do understand them. So what we're starting to see coming through is their native culture or their native language, such as Zulu, Xhosa, etc., coming through more within the taglines, giving them an idea that they understand, you understand them, you understand their community, and you understand the slang that is happening within their market. So one of the elements that was very important is when you spoke to them within their predominant language, it was also defined by whether you understood them. So in many cases, they felt that advertisers were condescending to them, and that they utilized the wrong medium to speak to them. So an example is showing them as poor. An example, if you're showing them utilizing a washing powder, you're showing them washing by hand in a bucket outside and hanging on a line, as opposed to showing them using a washing machine or a tumble dryer, which many consumers within the township market are actually utilizing in their day-to-day lives. What it also found is that when you started speaking to them within their specific language, a lot of the time it did come across as condescending. So in certain aspects, you would have a white person speaking to them in Zulu, as opposed to having a black person speaking to them in Zulu. So it's an understanding of how you should be speaking to a market, and more importantly, understanding that the black consumer is the same as the white consumer, and you don't need to be speaking to them differently. You actually need to be speaking to South Africans as one community, because gone are the days of segregation. When we start to bring through, the millennials grew up in an environment that was combined. There was no black, there was no white. So we as marketers are still marketing them to black consumers or township consumers as black consumers as opposed to white consumers. So the real element that's coming through is speak to your consumer, as opposed to actually talking to them across racial lines.
It's normally what I see the next person having. You know, they could be wearing it, they could be drinking it, they could be a brand of cigarettes. And like, for me, TV doesn't have that effect on me, honestly. My friends have been using Samsung phones, and I was using a Nokia before, and I started following them because I thought using a Samsung is much cooler.
Especially here in our area, you know, in this neighborhood, people get influenced easily because it's a trend in a way, you know.
They look up to you because of the behavior. You know, the things that you do, how you carry yourself, you know, things like that.
When people look up to you, especially when you know how to dress yourself and you know how to look after yourself and you know how to look and you know how to speak to people, people start following you, and it's easy for you to set a trend, and people will go with those people because I've seen Hlamalani using this, or I've seen Hlamalani eating this, or I've seen Hlamalani wearing this, and so therefore it is a good brand and I can use it, or it's safe.
Because when somebody's used it and it works for them, then you believe them more than, you know, TV. TV is just, it can be just anyone. I mean, they take someone with such a beautiful skin and they say they had pimples, but you don't know that person. So I think if it's someone you know, and you know they had a skin problem, and now you're seeing them and they're recommending something, you would believe that. It's more believable.
I prefer somebody telling me about it, because I mean, advertising, they advertise everything, and they say, when they advertise, they say everything is good, and not everything is that good.
I saw my friend drinking it. You know how curiosity killed the cat? You see something happening, you want to experience it yourself.
Chances are, if I see an advert and I like what I see, right, the chances of me buying it is if I see a friend that has it, because of, you know, that way I know for sure that it will deliver on the need.